perspective from somebody who is, he's really an academic in this. And I got to be honest, some of the books that he's written, More Guns, Less Crime, The Bias Against Guns, two absolutely fantastic books. Mr. John Lott is joining us via video. John is the former director or the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, which is an organization that, as far as academic quality research and education, this is the organization that you want to look at when it comes to true crime numbers. John, it's a privilege to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us on this Tuesday evening. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm actually the president right now of the center, so
okay.
I appreciate it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I know it's like we got to vet the information that's on the
something like that.
Yeah. But I wanted to talk to you first and foremost about the report that came out from the FBI here on the reduction of active shooters. Now, I could preach to the audience here, but I want to have you explain, why is it, according to the FBI, that there are so few active shooter incidents, but yet if you watch the legacy media, MSNBC, CNN, they'll tell you that there are literally thousands of active shooter incidents in the country each and every year.
Right. Well, you have different definitions of what's going on. The FBI active shooting reports are guns that are fired in public, not part of some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf, anything from one person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting. When you hear numbers from someplace like the Gun Violence Archive, which is a gun control group, the vast majority of their cases are instances involving drug gangs fighting against each other over drug turf. Most of the rest are things like a robbery. And, are gangs fighting against each other over drug turf important? Yeah, but basically the causes and solutions for those types of attacks, how to stop them, are very different than those where somebody will go into a public place with the sole goal of just trying to go and harm other people that are there. And so the FBI separates those out. I mean, on any given weekend, you may have 25 people shot or 30 people shot in Chicago. That doesn't get national news coverage because people aren't as interested with two gangs going and shooting at each other than they are if somebody goes into a movie theater or a school or a mall with the sole purpose of going and shooting innocent individuals. Those get very different coverage. These active shooting cases, as I mentioned, the definition, are much broader than mass public shootings. Mass public shootings are 4 or more people killed in a single attack that's there. The active shooting cases, many of them involve cases where guns fired where nobody's even shot. The other thing about these FBI data is that they rely on news reports to go and do that. And there's been some issues with how good of a job that they've done in collecting these news reports. But, as I say, when you hear the media saying, there was like 600 of these in a year, that's from the Gun Violence Archive. And as I say, well over 80% or so of those are going to be, so they define as 4 more people being shot as mass, not necessarily killed. And some of them may actually been injured in other ways, like running away and tripping and falling. But the vast majority of those are gang fights over things like drug turf.
So if gang member A and gang member B get into a shootout on the sidewalk outside of an elementary school in Chicago at 2:00 in the morning in August, the media will still classify that as a school shooting because it occurred, ostensibly within that gun-free zone, that 1,000 foot of a 1,000 feet radius of a school. So that's where the dishonesty in the numbers comes from, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Well, I mean, the FBI would exclude it simply because whether it was at a school or not, simply because you had 2 gangs fighting against each other. They're trying to go and get at those cases which get the media attention that's there, the types of things that the media focuses on. But, if you have it's not just the media. You have gun control groups, which will go, when they keep track of school shootings, will go and include it as a school shooting, even if somebody is kind of, at 2 a.m. Near the school, rather than actually on the school property, or maybe in the parking lot at 2 a.m. in the morning. That's not what most people would kind of think of as a school shooting.
I think the part that lends so much credibility to your organization is that it is a 501c3 and doesn't accept donations from gun or ammunition makers or organizations, advocacy organizations on either side of the argument of the gun control debate. And I think that's about the most important part, is that the integrity of the organization is built around how to get to solutions and honesty rather than advocacy for one side or the other. Wouldn't you say?
People can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. But look, just my own background. I've been an academic most of my life. I've had positions at Stanford, University of Chicago, the Wharton Business School, Yale University, UCLA. I worked in the U.S. Sentencing Commission as chief economist, and I was senior advisor for research and statistics in the Office of Justice Programs and the Office of Legal Policy at the Department of Justice. And I've dealt a lot with this data over time. And our organization is basically a group of academics. We have people from University of Chicago, Harvard, University of Michigan, other universities around the country who have knowledge about these issues. And, we use them to go, if it's something that deals with crime, anything from policing to gun issues to vote fraud to, if you name it, we probably have dealt with it one time or another.
So what would you say is the most common misconception that you guys end up having to debunk or deal with on a regular basis when it comes to the active shooter incidents in the United States or, gun crime overall?
Well, I suppose there are lots of things. One of the things that comes to mind is just people have this perception, and it's constantly made the claim that the United States is somehow unique in terms of mass public shootings. And that's simply false. You can just compare the United States to Germany, for example. Since 2000, the United States has had 9 mass public school shootings that have occurred. Germany has had 4. And, you have to adjust for population differences. The United States has 340 million people. Germany has something like about 83 million people. So, if you kind of take the fact that they're less than 1/4 the population that we have here in the United States, that would be the equivalent of them having like 16 compared to our 9. You have countries like Finland, for example, which has had 2 mass public school shootings. Finland has a population of like 5.5 million people. That's like 1/60th, less than 1/60th of what we have here in the United States. If you take their 2, that would be the equivalent of us having 120. Norway, France, other countries, you can go down and make similar comparisons. Nobody would compare the number of murders in New Hampshire with the number of murders in New York or California, because you have obviously huge differences in the population for those places. And so anybody who makes the comparison for news media would make a comparison. They do it in per capita terms. For some reason, when you're talking about mass public shootings, they don't put it in per capita terms. So anyway, and there are lots of issues that you can deal with. I basically forced myself and other people at our group to go and read through the diaries and manifestos for these mass murders in the United States. And I suppose my biggest pet peeve there is just the media absolutely refuses to cover those parts of their diaries and manifestos where these murderers explain why they picked the target that they did. Time after time, these guys are very explicit, spending large portions of their manifestos and diaries explaining why they pick the targets they do. And, it's not rocket science. These guys, you have individuals who are suicidal. I mean, people have always wanted to be suicidal, but at some point along the line, people who felt unappreciated realized that they could get a lot of attention if they killed people. And the more people they killed, the more media attention that they would get. Mm-hmm. You look at somebody like the Sandy Hook mass murderer. He, according to police, had put together what would be described as a doctoral dissertation, where he had looked at mass public shootings around the world over the previous 40 years. And it graphed out, according to one police report, the relationship between the number of people killed and the amount of media coverage that they got. And that his goal was to go and kill more people than the Norway killer had killed in 2011, where he had shot to death 67 people, which is more than any mass public shooting in the United States, and because he wanted to get more worldwide news coverage than the Norway killer had gotten. And, so these guys, as I say, may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. They know the more people they kill, the more media attention they're going to get. And they know if they go to a place where their victims aren't able to defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people. So you have people like the Covenant school shooter in Nashville. She, in her diary manifesto, explained that she had considered going after other targets, the Green Hills Mall there in Nashville, but had decided not to do that because people were able to carry guns that were there. She picked the school because she didn't think anybody would be able to go and stop her at that place. You look at the Buffalo mass murderer. You look at on our website at crimeresearch.org, we have literally collected dozens of statements from these mass murderers over the years, going all the way back to Columbine, which indicate that these guys have purposely tried to pick places where they knew their victims weren't going to be able to defend themselves. And my guess is the whole gun control debate that we have right now would be different if even once in a while the media would say, there's been yet another mass murderer who explicitly said that he picked this place because he wanted to go to some place where the victims weren't able to defend themselves. Well, one thing that I disagree with some conservatives on is they want to have school resource officers at schools.
Yep.
And I understand the issue, but having somebody in uniform has a really difficult task there. If you have one officer there in uniform, these attackers have real tactical advantages. Mm-hmm. If you have multiple buildings at the school, they can wait for the officer to move on to another building before they attack, or they themselves can move on to another target someplace else to attack. Or if they are going to attack in that place, who do you think they take out first? The first person they take out is the one who's in uniform, because he's the one that they know has a gun. One way of phrasing this is we have air marshals on planes. Does anybody think that air marshals ought to be in uniform?
Hell no.
I assume not. And I haven't heard anybody who thinks that they ought to be. And the reason is obvious, because the terrorist would know who to go and take out. And so if you're going to have a police officer there as opposed to an armed teacher, New Hampshire, obviously, if teachers have concealed carry permits, can carry at schools there.
Correct.
And that's been true for a very long time.
Trust me, the Democrats up here would like nothing more than to get rid of that. That's one of the things that they're actively trying to work against.
I think for a little while they got rid of being able to carry guns in the state capitol, which is something people have been able to do for a long time. And then that was reversed back when the Republicans got back in charge there. But you can look at the evidence. We have something well over 10,000 schools in the United States where teachers and staff are able to legally carry guns. Some places have had this experience for decades. And what you find is that all the school shootings, we've looked at everything from an accidental discharge all the way up to a mass public shooting, all the attacks where anybody's been wounded or killed have all occurred in schools that ban teachers or staff being able to go and carry. A number of them have occurred in places where police officers, where you have one officer there in uniform. But I think that's because somebody in uniform has such an incredibly difficult job trying to stop these attacks.
I think, if you allow me to interject, I think I found commonality when I looked into school shootings, because this obviously has been a conversation that's been going on for decades in the United States. And the commonality I found is active shooters, especially school shooters, came by way of their weapon illegally, committed multiple crimes in the process of obtaining the weapons, had some relationship to antipsychotics, released a manifesto in advance of the shooting, had said that they were going to commit violent acts. So there was a credible violent threat against a target. And the states had laws on the books that would allow them to go interview these people. There were failures of law enforcement. And on top of it, these people were known to law enforcement prior to the act. And I found this across most of the school shooters and most of the mass shooters, that there was a commonality and that they were highly specific in what they were going to do.
Right. Well, I mean, I think some of the school shooters fit into what you're saying. I mean, you have somebody like Nicholas Cruz at the Parkland school shooting. The sheriff's department had come out to his house something like 45 times. He had beaten his mom multiple times. Obviously, at school, he had made threats against people. But you had basically the DEI policies under the Obama administration, where they didn't want to go and have minority kids having criminal records, so they didn't do anything about him. But I don't think that explains all of it. And also this notion of psychiatric drugs. I don't think there's a lot of evidence with regard to that. First of all, the medical records are private, so we don't know. We've gone back, and on our website, you can find our data. We know what percent of the mass public shooters were seeing mental health care professionals prior to the attack, about half the time. But one of the things that's interesting to me is that there's not one case, not one of these mass public shootings over the last quarter century or so, where any of the mental health care professionals that were seeing these individuals identified them as either a danger to themselves or others. Unless and we can talk about why that's the case. I think there's a problem with kind of the model that mental health care professionals have. They're used to people coming in who want to get help. So they pretty much just accept what the people go and tell them. But look, the one common feature, I think, across all these cases is you have people who are suicidal. Not always is it known to people that they're suicidal. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. They won't feel unappreciated. You read their diaries and manifestos. Girls won't go out with them on dates. They're lonely. People don't appreciate them. And they want people to know that they were here. And even when they say things like, well, the media may not mention my name, but at least I'll know my name will be in the history books. And they'll frequently write things, if I can only kill more people than such and such did, I can get even more media attention. So to me, if you want to stop them, what you have to do is take away the media attention that they're going to get. And the way you take away the media attention is by limiting the number of people that they can harm. And the way you limit the number of people that they can harm is by making sure that somebody is able to be there quickly with a gun to be able to stop the attack. And that's the reason why you have teachers or staff being able to carry, or you just have concealed carry permit holders. We just finished a study that looked at all the active shooting cases in the United States over the 10 years from the beginning of 2014 through the end of 2023. And what we found was that civilians were actually more likely to, or actually stopped active shooting attacks at a higher rate than police did. When they did stop them, fewer people were killed or injured in the attacks that the civilians started, mainly because the civilians were more likely to be there right at the scene. Part of that is the reasons why we were talking about before with the tactical advantages that, the killers could avoid places where they see the police. The other thing is we have 670,000 full-time active police in the United States. Maybe a third are on duty at any point in time. So you have like 230 or so police officers, 230,000 police for a population of 340 million people. By contrast, you have 21.5 million concealed carry permit holders. But on top of that, you have 29 constitutional carry states like New Hampshire, where it's not even necessary for somebody to have a permit to be able to go and carry. And so the likelihood that you're going to have somebody there, a civilian who's able to legally carry, who'll be right there at the scene, somebody who won't be immediately identified by the attacker as somebody that the attacker has to worry about, makes it riskier for them to do the attack. It's the reason why you don't see them attacking schools where you have armed teachers or staff. Rather than having a sign in front of the school that says the school is a gun-free zone, they have a sign in front of the school that says, warning, select teachers and staff at this school are armed, carrying concealed, and will use the guns to go and protect the students and others here.
John, we got to take a very, very quick break. I hate to interrupt you. We got to take a very quick break, but we're going to carry you over into the next segment because I want to dive into some of the numbers here specifically, and I also want to talk a little bit more specifically about New Hampshire in terms of the game plan of the Democrats and what they're looking to do. Assuming that they were actually able to reclaim the state house here, coming up in just a very, very short period of time. We run 2-year election cycles here in New Hampshire, so a little bit crazy. Much more with Dr. John Lott when Granite State Live continues. Don't go away. Welcome back to Granite State Live on this Tuesday evening, the 3rd day of June, 2025. I'm your host, Keith Hansen. Joining me is Julian Aciard. And joining us on the video line tonight is Dr. John Lott. He is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. If you're just joining the program, we are talking about a couple of different things here. First of all, the active attack data or the active shooter data that just came out from the FBI. Comparing the numbers from 2023, 2024, showing a 50% reduction in the number of active shooter situations. And then also, interestingly enough, after about a 2-year wait here, now the manifesto of the Covenant school shooting has been released. Now, one of the things I do want to mention, and we're welcoming John Lott back onto the program. Again, John, thanks so much for being a part of the program tonight. One of the things that I do recommend people do, and I know you I don't know if it was inadvertent or not, but you mentioned the name of the Parkland school shooting. We subscribe to the Don't Name Them, and we would encourage people, especially in the media, don'tnamethem.org. What we don't want to do is give credit to the people who are conducting these, let's call them what they are, they're acts of terror. And I think that's one of the things, too, is you notice how these people in their manifestos, they're seeking notoriety. They always want to be the person who has the higher body count. I'm going to go down in history as the person who commits the worst example of this whatsoever. And I wonder how much, correlation not necessarily equal causation, how much of this is driven by this need to be recognized. Everybody wants to be a social media influencer. Everybody wants to have their voice heard. And if I can't make it through legitimate means, well, all I have to do is pick up a firearm, walk into a densely populated area, kill a couple of people, and suddenly for the next, 5, 6, 7 days, the media does nothing except focus on me. Are you seeing statistics that would suggest that that type of notoriety and the attention specifically that the media is giving to these people as being a driving factor, or perhaps even a factor that would tip a person over into committing something like this?
Right. Well, I thought we'd gone through this, but it's basically you have people who are suicidal, who feel unappreciated. And this is one way that they feel that people will at least know that they were here. They'll frequently use terms like, people will know that I was here. I assume at an earlier time, these people would have just committed suicide quietly. But someplace along the line in the last 4 decades or whatever, 3 or 4 decades, people realized that they could go and get a lot of attention by committing suicide in this particular way. You have most of these individuals, 75% or so die at the scene, either because they kill themselves or because they're killed by police. You have a lot of what is called police-assisted suicide, where they'll purposely point their gun at the police officer and force the police officers to go and kill them. But even the 25% or so that live didn't plan on living. They planned on dying at the scene and just at the last moment couldn't bring themselves to go and kill themselves. That's pretty much overwhelmingly the case that you have there.
Now, unfortunately, the alert website, activeattackdata.org, is down, so I wasn't able to pull the new numbers, but just based off of a presentation that I had prepared, the numbers from 2000 to 2022, 520 occurrences. And then looking at, again, the numbers, active attacks. And one of the things, too, you're seeing the terminology change now from active shooter to active attack because people have realized that it's not just a firearm that I can use to kill large numbers of people. I can use a knife. I can use vehicles. We saw what just happened in Colorado, where you have a person who's trying to use a makeshift flamethrower, to try to kill and injure people. So if a person is looking to engage in that felonious, aggressive, deadly behavior, they can do that with a number of tools. But, based upon those 520 occurrences that have been documented and researched by the FBI, 287 or 59% involved a handgun, only 30% involved a rifle, which is kind of counterintuitive or of what the drive-by media narrative is, that it's always the AR-15 that's committing these. But yet the rifle is only used in 30% of these instances. Overwhelming numbers are handguns, obviously.
Half of those instances it's used in connection with other types of weapons. You have about 17% of mass public shootings only involve a rifle. About 56% only involve a handgun. It turns out that the deadliest attacks are ones where they use multiple different types of weapons. Those turn out to be the deadliest. But no, I mean, you're exactly right. The media makes a lot bigger deal about the weapon when it's a so-called assault weapon. They're more likely to give that a lot of coverage than they are if a handgun is used. And, it's just a question. A lot of these things are just whether it fits a particular narrative. We talked before about the fact that the media just absolutely refuses to go and mention how these guys picked the target that they did. I would think that would be newsworthy, but apparently it doesn't fit the media narrative on it. And there are lots of other things, like, as you're implying, the type of weapon, that obviously has a lot to do with the narrative that they have. Also, kind of who the victims are and who did the shooting affects a lot of the amount of media coverage that the attack's going to get.
One of the things, and I remember an article that came out, CNN did a story about a year and a half ago about they portrayed it as the dismally low numbers of armed citizens successfully stopping active shooters. Now, I would hearken the numbers that I've used. Again, this is from FBI, NIJ, and DOJ numbers based on the 520 occurrences from 2000 to 2022. There were 297 where the situation was stopped prior to the first arrival of law enforcement. And of those, the potential victims stopped the attacker in 78 instances, or 26.26% of the time, physically subdued the attacker 52 instances, or 17.5%, shot the attacker only 26 out of 297, and that was an 8.75 number. But what CNN failed to disclose was the number of active attacks that occurred in these areas that were gun-free zones. So ostensibly, the law-abiding citizens would not be carrying firearms into these locations. Therefore, they wouldn't have access to the tool to use a firearm to stop the attacker, which is why only 8.75% of these have been stopped by armed citizens. Your thoughts on those numbers?
I don't have it memorized back to 2000, but if you look at the data over the last 10 years prior to the report that just came out today, from 2014 to 2023, what you find, the FBI would claim about 4.5% of those were stopped by civilians legally carrying a gun. The problem is that, and there's like 302 of those cases. The problem is that the FBI missed a lot of cases that fit their definition that systematically involve civilians stopping these attacks. When I was working in the Department of Justice as the senior advisor for research and statistics, one of the tasks that I had was to go back and evaluate the FBI reports. And there are all sorts of cases that they missed, and we've continued looking at it afterwards. So rather than the 14 cases, I think it's like 180 cases. They also misclassified some cases where civilians stopped them. They classified them as security guards, like the white settlement church shooting in Fort Worth in 2019. Mm-hmm. The problem is that even when you can get the FBI to admit that they missed something, they still haven't fixed it years later. I could go and give you a lot of war stories, but there's a lot of political bias there at the FBI. And nobody needs to take my word for this. They can go to our website at crimeresearch.org and go back through some of the older posts we've had on our research where we list out all those cases, have links to the underlying news stories. So, police departments don't collect this data on active shootings. The FBI hired some people down at Texas State University to go and do Google news searches of all things rather than Nexus searches on these things. And that creates its own biases, particularly in their initial reports when they were looking at cases that were, a decade or more earlier prior to it. It's amazing how many cases of one particular type they missed. And, maybe it's an accident. It's kind of strange credulity that they would miss that many of that one particular type. But what makes it even more concerning is that not only did they miss it, but even when they were told about missing those cases, they never went back and fixed them. And so that to me is concerning. And now if you push them, and there's been some media places that have reached out to them about missing these cases, they basically say, well, the data that we're putting together is just suggestive. It's not, they seem to be indicating that they're not meaning it to be comprehensive. And if they're not meaning it to be comprehensive, then any of the analysis that's going on, the types of numbers that you're talking about by looking at the report aren't very useful to go and look at.
Going back to, I want to just harken back to something that you were talking about earlier, and Julian had alluded to this with the SSRIs. Now, this is something, and I've read a number of white papers from Dr. Peter Breggin about the dangers of adolescent usage of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I'm going to go back to 2013. Dan Roberts, who has become a personal friend now, was the first person that I ever saw. He had published an article in Ammo Land, again, going back to 2013, establishing a connection between SSRIs and instances of, back then it was primarily school shooters. I can tell you that the numbers that are used in the training circles alert and MACTAC, multiple assault counterterrorism action capability, and a couple of other disciplines within the active shooter tactical counterterrorism domains, holds that it's approximately 90% of the people who have engaged in mass shootings have had a history of being medicated with SSRIs. Not saying that 90% of people who are recipients of SSRIs are going to become mass shooters, but that of the mass shootings that have occurred in this country, approximately 90% have been perpetrated by people who have a documented history of receiving, at some point in time and very close to the commission of the crime, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Do you think? And I know it's dangerous because people are, God, you're going to piss off the pharmaceutical companies.
First of all, I don't believe the 90% number. We have HIPAA rules, privacy rules, that makes it impossible to know whether these individuals were taking it or not. They may guess. They may think they guess. I'm just saying about half of the mass public shooters were actually seeing mental health care professionals. Arthur Berg, who's on our academic advisory board, has been a professor of psychiatry at Harvard. And he was associate professor there. And according to him, basically what happens is you can have these psychotic breaks from taking these drugs, but it occurs basically when you have changes in the dosages that are there, and that the breaks are relatively short-lived, and it occur relatively soon after the changes in dosages. So you're talking about something that may occur over a matter of weeks. And one of the problems that you have with that point is that these guys are planning these attacks years in advance. The Sandy Hook killer was planning his attack 2.5 years before the attack. 6 months before the attack is like a short period of time beforehand to go and plan the attack. Maybe assuming that you can really identify whether somebody was on one of these drugs or not, and not just guessing whether they were on the drugs, maybe the change, and that they were having a change in the dosage, and that change in dosage happened to occur near when the attack occurred. Again, lots of guesses that I don't think people have any data or real information on. But let's assume that they have that. Maybe you could go and argue that it just provided the final trigger for them to go and do the attack. But this is something that they were seriously considering and writing up in their diary and writing notes on and writing manifestos on, a year or 2 years very frequently prior to the attack occurring. So it wasn't just something that there was a change in the dosage that caused them to say, geez, I'm just going to go, I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks now, and I'm going to go out and do this attack. And there's a lot of things there that I've asked people in this area who have made this claim, I say, show me the documentation you have that these guys were actually on these drugs, because I can't find it. And I've looked at this stuff very carefully. I've read their diaries and manifestos. You would think that they might mention it once or twice in the diaries or manifestos that they were on those drugs, but you don't see that mentioned in those cases. If they have prescription information for those individuals, if they have information on the dosage changing, I'd love to see it. I've asked people many times to go and show me the actual evidence that they have on that. And I haven't yet, over the years, God only knows how many times I've asked for it. But if they have it, if you have one of these guys who can actually verify this 90% number that they're claiming, I'd love to see it.
I have a comment or a question actually from a viewer. Barbara in Exeter was asking if I could ask you about the connection between video games, violent video games, and mass shootings. This seems to be one of the go-to areas, people trying to explain why people would do this. Well, he was addicted to violent video games, and so the lines between fantasy and reality were blurred, and now he's a mass shooter. Your thoughts on that from a research and statistics standpoint?
Well, it's possible, but there's no way I'm going to be able to prove it, mainly because, ideally what you want to have is like different instant, causation factors changing at different times and different places. You just can't have it so that it's, the United States as a whole starts having video games, because then you really only have, one control variable that's there, and you can't really do much with it. If like some states had outlawed kids playing video games and others had allowed it, and they had done the rules at different times when they changed those rules, you could go and see, did a state that started to allow people to play video games, how did mass public shootings change in that state relative to other ones that hadn't changed their laws at that period? But unfortunately, you can't do that. You can do that with things like gun-free zones. You can do it with concealed carry rules. You can, you mentioned all sorts of other things like red flag laws and stuff like that, which I'm happy to talk about. I don't think that they produce the benefits that people think that they do. But those types of policies you can go and analyze.
Well, let me ask you just in terms of general, because we talk about expanded background checks, we talk about extended waiting periods, we talk about red flag laws, we talk about closing the gun show loophole. All of these arguments that you hear the radical anti-gunners talking about. Is there a single aspect to any of the tactics of the anti-gun left that has actually produced documented, quantifiable improvements to crime numbers?
Unfortunately, I wish there were some ones that they had that did it. I think the rules that they have, like the creation of gun-free zones, make it worse for the reasons that we're talking about, that these gun-free zones actually serve as magnets for these attacks because these guys know that they're going to be able to go and kill more people in those places. But you look at these things like these background checks on the private transfers of guns. If such a law had been in effect federally and had been perfectly enforced, there's not one mass public shooting over this century that would have been stopped by such a law being in effect. We have states like California and a number of other states that have that type of law, as well as many other types. California actually has a relatively high per capita rate compared to the average for the rest of the country, much higher than states like Texas or Florida. Things like red flag laws. What people have to understand is red flag laws are almost always used for concerns about somebody being suicidal. What happens with the red flag law is if somebody's concerned about somebody being a danger to themselves or others, they can go and put in a written statement. A judge, based solely on that written statement, will make a decision whether or not to take away somebody's guns. There's no hearing or anything that occurs. But the only thing that the judge can do, the only power that they have with these red flag laws, is to take away a person's legally owned guns. And the problem is that, there are lots of ways to commit suicide. The notion that if you just take away a person's guns, he can't commit suicide isn't really serious. If you're really concerned about somebody being a danger to themselves, which, as I say, is the vast, overwhelming majority of these cases where it's used, it seems like you'd want to do something serious about dealing with the mental health problems that the person has, or if you really think that they're going to commit suicide, and they could commit suicide in lots of ways, you may want to try to commit themselves for some period of time. And in fact, what we have in all 50 states, and we've had this for a long time, are these civil commitment type laws, where what happens is that if you're concerned about somebody being a danger to themselves or others, you can contact the police. If the police find that there's, quote, a reasonable probability, which basically is like a 20% chance that the person is a danger to themselves or others, they can be taking in and be giving a psychiatric evaluation depending upon the state, it could be one or two or three different experts that will look at the person. And if the experts agree that there's a reasonable chance that the person is a danger to themselves or others, then what will happen is there can be a hearing. And it depends on the state, whether it's the preponderance of the evidence or whether it's kind of beyond a reasonable doubt or whatever. A judge has a range of options. One thing a judge can do is can say, look, if you agree to see a mental health care expert, we can have another hearing in a week or two, and we can reevaluate where we are at that point. A judge can take away the person's driver's license if they think they may go and drive, or even impound their car. If they think the person might drive a car through a crowd of people someplace, they can take away their gun. They have a whole range of options. Or in the most extreme case, they can involuntarily commit the person. That, to me, seems like a much more useful type of law than just taking away the guns. What gun control people want people to think, if I simply take away a person's guns, that solves all the problems. There's no concern about suicide. There's no concern about somebody harming other people. We just had, the most dangerous mass attacks, as you were defining it earlier, have been with vehicles. Yeah. You look at the attack in France. There was something like over 80 people that were killed, many hundreds of people that were maimed and wounded in that attack. We've had many vehicle attacks around the world that have occurred. You've had just in the last 6 months had a couple in Germany that have taken place. So it's the notion that somehow gun control people want to get across, if I just take away the person's guns, everything will be safe. That doesn't even account for the fact that the person may illegally obtain a gun at that point. Or you may not know all the guns that they may have.
The bottom line is that Democrats like the low-hanging fruit. I shouldn't even say Democrats. Because there's even some anti-gun Republicans. So the anti-gun crowd is very low-hanging fruit oriented, and they love to think that they can either seize or legislate evil out of man's heart. Unfortunately, Dr. Lott, that is all the time that we have this evening. I want to thank you so much. I'd love to get you back on the program again, because there's some really New Hampshire specific things that I'd like to get into with you at some point in time down the road. But I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and you can check out volumes of research over there, crimeresearch.org. That's crimeresearch.org. Keep up the good work, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you for coming on, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, and that is going to do it for this Tuesday evening's edition of Granite.